Hi, I'm Resa, and I am 28 going on 29 years old. And it's been almost 4 years since I was first diagnosed with systemic lupus. So I would say maybe like a year or so plus before diagnosis, there were just some weird things happening to me. I didn't know what was going on. I always talk about, the story to when you figured out you had lupus. It usually comes from a time of immense stress. And for me, that was also the case. In early 2018, I was also laid off of my first role out of grad school. And that was really hard for me to recover from. I was unemployed for several months, and during my unemployment, I noticed a big change in me and my energy and just what I was able to do. Every single day, I would wake up extremely sore and in pain, as if I had gone to the gym the night before or something like that. But I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't working. I wasn't, nearly as half as busy as I was prior to being laid off. So I just didn't understand what was happening. But then towards the summer of 2018, it got worse to the point where I was like, okay, maybe I just need a new mattress. I keep waking up and it feels like I got hit by a truck or something like that. So I got a new mattress, but not much changed. I noticed that I would get up to shower and turning the faucet in my bathroom would be really challenging for me. I remember having breakdowns like, who tightened this faucet so hard? Like, why is it so hard to, turn? And my parents would just look at me like, what's wrong with you? It's not even that tight. So it was very, very weird things happening. But I think the most challenging thing that I had to come to terms with was there was a day where I was really, really stressed out. I had like an altercation with someone and I was really upset. So I was crying, I was just upset. And I fell asleep after being upset. And when I woke up, my fingers were swollen and it felt like my fingers were dislocated. And I didn't do anything but take a nap and wake up. So after that kind of big instance of feeling like my fingers were literally broken or injured, I did my research, found a rheumatologist. So I found someone in my borough of Brooklyn, New York at the time, and I scheduled an appointment to see them. And it was a couple weeks before my 25th birthday that I went in, and I tried to really explain all of my symptoms. I forgot to mention that I also had some hair loss in the years prior, but I didn't know what that was attributed to. So I tried to really sit this person down and say, here's everything that I've experienced, all the nitty-gritty details. And they were kind of rushing me a little bit, and they were like making assumptions like, oh, it sounds like you have Sjogren's. Oh, it sounds like rheumatoid arthritis. And I'm like, I've done a lot of research and I'm literally matching up what I've been feeling to, what the research says. And I think it might be lupus. So ultimately she said, we should do a, blood test. So I had to draw blood, maybe like 6 vials of, blood, which is a lot for me because I have a huge legitimate fear of needles. So it took like 3 different techs to hold me down and like calm me. I had to smell like the smelling salts because I was about to faint at one point. But ultimately doing all that testing was what led me to getting the diagnosis when I came back 2 weeks later. And she told me, yeah, so you're right, you had lupus and you also have rheumatoid arthritis and I want to put you on Benlysta, and just rolling off like a big bomb on me. But I had my diagnosis. Yeah, so after my initial diagnosis, I kind of took matters into my own hands. I was a little traumatized by that experience, but I felt like, whatever, this person doesn't get me, this person doesn't care to get me, so I'm gonna take matters into my own hands. I had known of a couple people who had been dealing with lupus for years. So, something that they shared was kind of how lifestyle changes of like drastic diet changes were really, really helpful for them. So because I didn't want to go this extreme route of injecting myself with medication on a weekly basis, which is a lot for me, I just took to the, if I had to choose between one of the 2 evils, I think not eating what I want to eat will probably be a little bit more manageable to transition into. So I definitely completely changed my diet. I would notice that those feelings of waking up in pain and just having different lesions on my skin and things like that, I noticed that sometimes depending on what I eat, it would get worse. So I cut out dairy, I cut out gluten, and eventually I went plant-based. And I noticed a difference. I noticed a significant difference. But I was still in an active flaring type of season. So I started a new job. Again, lupus is very much triggered by stress from what I've seen and heard and experienced myself. So I started a new job and it was exciting, but I had a lot going on in my personal life that was very, very stressful and challenging for me. Literally on the evening of day 5, so it was a Friday night after my first week on the job, and at that point, my jaw had gotten swollen, and I was really scared, but I got dressed and I was in my room waiting till like 11:50 before calling an Uber to the hospital, so that if I got admitted or if I got seen, at least it would be after midnight on the day that my insurance was due to kick in. So that's what I did. I went to the hospital, and as soon as I said, oh yeah, I got diagnosed with lupus, the doctors there were just like, yeah, I don't really know how to deal with this. So they kind of got a little edgy and didn't really know how to manage me. I had a nurse who was very impatient with me. Again, fear of needles, not like a joke, legitimate fear of needles. And they're trying to put an IV in my arm. And up until this point in my life, I have never been in the hospital except to be born. So it was just a lot for me. I was overwhelmed. After that ER visit, I had already scheduled a new appointment with a new rheumatologist from a more prestigious medical network. And I went to see them and I explained everything to them, and I, tried to share the diagnosis that I had. They were questioning why I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. They didn't think that was an accurate diagnosis. He had mentioned, starting me with medication. But it wasn't like you have to do this or else. It was more like, I strongly recommend this based on what I've heard you tell me and based on like this hospital visit and stuff. I tried to start it, but I kept getting nauseous every time I would take the medication because, again, taking pills, all these different things, it's like such a huge change for me. And after seeing him, at this point, I was very depressed and very anxious and just unsettled, not knowing if I would see another day, another week, another year. So I think I went to see him for a follow-up visit, and, he saw and asked about how, I was doing, and I shared it. I was open about my state. And he actually, really spoke to me and said, I think we can definitely continue to see each other and help you to treat, lupus. But I actually want to introduce you to one of my close friends and colleagues who is more experienced with this and might be more relatable to you in terms of your unique experience as a Black woman feeling anxious about this and having this new diagnosis. When I went to finally go visit her at another hospital location, she was waiting for me at the waiting room. I was anxious, there's so much happening. She was waiting for me. She took way longer than the allotted patient visit time to really fully hear my entire story up until this point. And she educated me. And through that, it was a black and white experience from that first diagnosis that I had. And that was the start of a new relationship where I agreed to come in for quarterly visits. I agreed to get my blood drawn and make sure that everything is, copacetic with my disease. I agreed to even start medication and be consistent with it. I even agreed to consider clinical trials, which are all things that I would have never, ever, ever thought twice about. So I just always think about the vast difference between those experiences. And I know for a fact that what it boils down to is that patient and physician relationship. I think if I'm talking to someone who's, newly diagnosed with lupus or is trying to figure out if they have lupus, I would really say you know your body better than anyone else on earth. And really pay attention to those slight changes. And it's not to say become a hypochondriac and, go off the deep end, but really consider what's happening, what's different within yourself. For me, what helped me was doing a ton of research. I mean, I Googled what was happening to me. So hair loss or joint pain or muscles hurting when waking up. Why am I sore when waking up? I promise you're not the first person to ask these same questions. So educating yourself, but also finding community, right? Because you're not the first person to be experiencing this. So go where the people who have experienced this and have talked about it and have advocated for it and have educated about it are, and ask your questions. It's not to say that their experience is going to mirror yours, but their experience might shed light on something that you are feeling and experiencing and going through that you feel very alone in and that no one understands. And lupus shows up so differently for so many different people. Like, I don't think any two lupus cases are the same, but obviously there are some similarities that different people experience. Or even if you're not experiencing it, just knowing that what's a possibility in terms of symptoms or side effects or things like that could just be helpful, because I feel like when you have that knowledge, you have more power. And when you have more power, you can show up in these medical spaces and advocate for yourself, because no one is going to advocate for you more than you can, because you know your body. And I'm grateful that despite how hard it was, I pushed. I asked questions. I said, hey, can you wait and let me finish explaining myself? When things were just kind of spoken to me, I'm like, what does that mean? What is that? Just asking so many more questions and not being afraid to help me to feel like, okay, this is not something that's just going to be done to me and I'm just going to sit here and take it, but I can be a part of what's happening to me. So yeah, that's the advice that I would give, and reach out for community, because you're definitely not alone.